It was from one of these songs that I heard that he had to marry Miss Mary, when he had in fact loved somebody else, now living in Chicago or Detroit, Michigan. He was not sure that Jolie, her baby, was also his baby. Sometimes he would cry, and that was an indication that he was about to die again, and so we would all get prepared, for we were sure to be called upon. I was 7 the first time I remember actually participating in one of Mr. Sweet's revivals. My parents told me I had participated before. I had been the one chosen to kiss him and tickle him long before I knew the rite of Mr. Sweet's rehabilitation. He also had come to our house. It was a few years after his wife's death, and he was very, very sad, and also typically very drunk. He sat on the floor next to me and my older brother. The rest of the children were grown and lived elsewhere, and he began to play his guitar and cry. I held his woolly head in my arms and wished I could have been old enough to have been the woman he loved so much, and that I had not been lost years and years ago. When he was leaving, my mother said to us that we'd better sleep light that night, for we'd probably have to go over to Mr. Sweet's before daylight. And we did, for soon after we had gone to bed, one of the neighbors knocked on our door and called my father and said Mr. Sweet was sinking fast, and if he wanted to get a word before the crossover, he'd better shake a leg and get over to Mr. Sweet's house. All the neighbors knew to come to our house if something was wrong with Mr. Sweet, but they did not know how we always managed to make him well, or at least stop him from dying when he was so often near death. As soon as we heard the cry, we got up, my mother and I, and my mother and father, and put on our clothes. We hurried out of the house and down the road, for we were always afraid that we might someday be too late, and Mr. Sweet would get tired of dallying. When we got to the house, a very poor shack really, we found the front room full of neighbors and relatives, and someone met us at the door and said it was very sad that old Mr. Sweet Little, for Little was his family name, although we mostly ignored it, was about to kick the bucket. My parents were advised not to take my brother and me into the death room, seeing we were so young and all, but we were so much more accustomed to the death room than he that we ignored him and dashed in without giving his warning a second thought. I was almost in tears, for these deaths upset me fearfully, and the thought of how much depended on me and my brother, who was such a hand most of the time, made me very nervous. The doctor was bending over the bed and turned back to tell us, at least the 10th time in the history of my family, that Alice, old Mr. Sweet Little, was dying, and children had best not see the face of implacable death. I didn't know what implacable meant, but whatever it was, Mr. Sweet was not. My father pushed his rather abruptly out of the way, saying, as he always did, and very loudly, for he was saying it to Mr. Sweet, "To hell with dying men. These children want Mr. Sweet," which was my cue to throw myself upon the bed and kiss Mr. Sweet all around the whiskers and under the eyes and around the collar of his nightshirt, where he smelled so strongly of all sorts of things, mostly liniment or alignment. I was very good at bringing him around, for as soon as I saw that he was struggling to open his eyes, I knew he was going to be all right, and so could finish my revival sure of success. As soon as his eyes were open, he would begin to smile, and that way I knew that I had surely won. Once, though, I got a tremendous scare. For he could not open his eyes, and later I learned that he had had a stroke and that one side of his face was stiff and hard to get into motion. When he began to smile, I could tickle him I could tickle him in earnest, because I was sure that nothing would get in the way of his laughter, although once he began to cough so hard he almost threw me off his stomach, but that was when I was very small, little more than a baby, and my bushy hair had gotten his nose. When we were sure he would listen to us, we would ask him why he was in bed, and when he was coming to see us again, and could we play his guitar, which more than likely would be leaning against the bed. His eyes would get all misty, and he would sometimes cry out loud. But we never let it embarrass us, for he knew that we loved him and that we sometimes cried too much for no reason. My parent would leave the room to just the three of us. Mr. Sweet by that time would be propped up in bed with a number of pillows behind his head, and with me sitting and lying on his shoulder and along his chest. Even when he had trouble breathing, he would not ask me to get down. Looking into my eyes, he would shake his white head and run scratchy old finger all around my hairline, which was rather low now, nearly to my brows. It made some people say I looked like a baby monkey.